Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Northern Lights Canadian Women in Tech and Business, where we spotlight the women shaping Canada's business landscape through leadership, innovation, and long-term impact. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Priti Singh, Chief Risk Officer at CPP Investments. Priti leads the organization's global risk management functions, ensuring that risk perspectives are embedded across all investment decisions, spanning market, credit, climate, liquidity, and operational risk. Before this role, she led capital markets and factor investing, managing globally diversified investments across public equities, fixed income, currencies, commodities, and derivatives. She's also previously served as managing director and head of external portfolio management. Priti holds an MBA from the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto and a master's in physics at the University of Waterloo, and serves on the Common Investment Committee of the Sunnybrook Foundation. Priti, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure, Berlin. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Let's start with our first question, which is, can you tell us about your journey into finance and risk management and when you realized this was the right path you wanted to pursue?
Okay, Berlin, I'd love to tell you that I had this all mapped out exactly when I was back in high school, but that would be not the truth. My career journey has actually had, I would say, multiple paths as I've gone through my also my studies as well as my work experience. As you said, I originally started out, I had from a physics background, so I had a master's in physics. And then my first career as such was in the telecommunication sector. I worked for a company that some of you may heard of. It's Nortel Networks. It was at its time one of the largest firms. And I had the chance to be there in multiple different areas within the firm, but all the way through the rise and then unfortunately the bust. So I'm talking back in 2000. And after that, where you realize it's probably not a very wise financial move to have all your investments, including your personal, in all one stock, which I would not recommend. Um, I decided that maybe it's time for me to shift my career. And at that time, a lot of physicists were going into finance. And I figured, why don't I just start there? And so I started that journey back in 2003, 2004, worked in a few different places. And then in 2008, I joined CPPIB and I joined the external portfolio management team. So this is a team that is responsible for allocating to managers. And so I joined on the investment side. And then roughly about, so I worked my career through that phase. And then roughly about 18 months ago, John, who's our CEO, reached out and said, Priti, I'd like you to take on the role of the chief risk officer. And I was like, you're talking to me? He says, yes. And so that's how I came into risk as well. So I'm going to pause here so see if you have any follow-up questions for me.
What an amazing journey you've had. And just building on that, I'm curious to know, you began your academic career in physics before earning your MBA. How did that scientific training shape the way you think about uncertainty, probability, and decision making?
Yeah, and I do think, at least based on having had a chance to reflect on my whole journey, which started out with the science background, and then I added on skills that I picked up as part of finance and then an MBA.
Mhm.
Um, I would say that you start to realize that it's not the field that is that important, it's the capabilities that you bring up. It's the logical thinking, it's the process skills, it's how you deal with people. And you start to realize that you just apply these capabilities in just different fields.
Mhm.
And my biggest takeaway is that some of the things that I had learned back in, like my MBA that I did back in 2008, like marketing, branding, organizational design, I probably didn't use them at all in the first, 10 years of my career at CPPIB, but probably those skills are what I use a little bit more of now.
Mhm.
So you realize that these are just skills and capabilities. You may not get to use them at a certain time, but all you're doing is just building an arsenal of these things that you can draw upon depending on where you are in your career. So I would say things like probability. I use that a lot more in risk. I had some of it in my investment fields, but a lot more of that. So again, depending on where you are, it's like it's this memory, right, that you have in the back of your mind, and then you just draw upon it.
Of course. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think our listeners would really like to know, early in your career, what experiences most influenced how you approach risk today, especially in high stakes environments?
So, a couple of experiences stand out for me very much. Berlin is the first one was the one I talked about, the high tech bubble and the bust. So I've been on the euphoria where everything is great, and then you turn out and you realize, okay, that was not so great. It was built on a certain set of assumptions. So I thought I had learned my lesson well. And I joined CPPIB, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to join a nice, safe pension plan and everything else. Like, this is good. And then we had the 2008 crisis in there, so the great financial crisis. And I would say both of these really shaped how I think about risk. And I think about risk and return as two sides of the same coin. I don't think you can think about returns without thinking about risk. And you can't think about just risk if you're not thinking about the returns associated with it. And so, having had these experiences pretty early in my career, I found that very much shaped how I've approached both, not just my capital markets career, but also my risk career. And then when COVID happened, I think COVID was something that really stood out for me because it was not just a financial, it was a human crisis as well, right? And how do you think about people? Because ultimately what we do is we are a people business, we're a talent business, and we are people making investment decisions. And COVID really brought out a whole set of new skills in terms of how you think about risk and really the skills that, like the risk that can be modeled, like you can look back in history. So I would say these three probably things really shape how I think about return and risk.
Mhm. I think that's really great to know. And I think that also leads me perfectly into my next question, which is before coming Chief Risk Officer, you led capital markets and factor investing across global asset classes. How did that investing experience change your perspective on risk versus opportunity?
Yeah. So again, having had those two experiences, so when I started out in 2008, so just to give you a perspective, I started out as an analyst in the team. And as an analyst, we were a very small team. We were only 5 people at that time. Um, you really got a chance to learn firsthand that all your return projections that you had, you better be thinking about that downside risk when you put that in. So um, even before we had a standalone risk department at the firm,
Mhm.
um, my team was one of the team that we started out had actually onboarded quite a bit of the risk systems in place because you realize that you cannot make these investments if you don't have that background, that risk lens. So risk and return have always been joined up for me, and so the other thing that has been really interesting is that as you are in public markets, every day the market tells you with great pleasure whether you're right or wrong. Every
Mhm.
day you get a feedback loop that says, you know what your assumptions you thought that may or may not have worked out. And it really causes you to um, think through and stay true to your convictions because sometimes the market moves for lots of different reasons. And so it allows you to think very much, being very disciplined both on return and risk side. So for me, it is just the way that I've been learned because every day the market's and so you need to realize that we are a long horizon investor. You cannot trade day in, day out. Maybe if you're trading $100, you can, but when you are at our size, you really need to think about what is the horizon that is appropriate. Is that fit for you and all of that? So that something has been something I've learned over the years.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I did want to ask one more question on this front, which is climate and systemic risks are increasingly central to investing. How has your thinking evolved about the responsibility large institutions have in shaping long-term global outcomes?
So it's very much something that I also like. Maybe I would say that on the capital market side, maybe it was a little bit more shorter term trading oriented, but we also invest across all asset classes. So privates, including infrastructure, sustainable energy companies. And so this is very much in our DNA. As every investment that you're thinking about, how do you incorporate climate scenarios, systemic risks? Because some of these in individual may be manageable, but when you aggregate it all up at the total portfolio level, you really need to think through that. And so my team particularly also plays quite a strong role in terms of scenario analysis that we do, looking at different various assumptions. And then to look at that and say, hey, is the portfolio getting better at every day and every year as we start to think about these things? So this is something very much that we do, and it's part of our investment process. So it's not like something that comes in at the end, like you've done all the work and in the end somebody else comes in and does this. It's part of the process, and that's kind of how we've generally gone around some of these climate scenarios or even the systemic risks that we have. AI is very topical right now as well as you start to think about it.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. I just wanted to switch gears here for a moment and ask you if there was a pivotal leadership moment where you had to trust your judgment or find confidence in your voice during uncertainty.
For me, Berlin, it was COVID,
Mhm.
right? Because there was no leadership book that told you what to do, right? And even I think back of the previous crises we've had, we've always made the assumption that your team is going to be with you. You can call in, you can do these. And like even if I think about the high tech crisis or the 2008 crisis, I mean I could walk over to my team and talk to them, right? Um, COVID was really something that was totally unanticipated, and the fact that you know all of a sudden at that time I was leading a team of 35 people globally, and all of a sudden we went from 3 offices to 35 offices, right? Because everybody was working at home. Everybody's financial and personal situation was quite different. Um, Globally, the teams were all going through very different things. In the time that we're also managing a portfolio on behalf of the 22 million Canadians that have entrusted us to take care of their assets. And so, how do you actually deal with both personal, professional, and the investing world? And to me, that was probably one of the hardest things that you had to deal with. And I still remember, some of my colleagues out in Hong Kong where we were having calls, but because all the kids were at home and they had a 1 bedroom, they didn't have a study or whatever.
Mhm.
The person's actually going outside in the corridor to try and take a call and things like that. And it's like, you know, it brings a very human element into these decisions that you make. And I would say navigating through that period was probably one of the toughest ones I've had to face.
Mhm.
And you had to learn, right? Like you just had to learn how to deal with it. And we did.
Mhm. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that response. I think you made some very valuable points there. And I'm just curious to know, finance, particularly risk leadership, can still be very male dominated. What challenges have you faced, and how do you learn to lead authentically in those spaces?
So this will be an interesting story, Berlin, because so I've been in physics. So let's just say physics is not a lot of females as well. And so when I started in the investment field back in 2008 in the public market side, um, they were there were not a lot of females around either. And so for me, because I had come from physics to that, I actually never thought of it as odd.
Mhm.
The odd moment probably came to me was actually I had come up a little bit on my career, and this was in 2014 or so. I remember that because that was the first time I realized. So we had a meeting of, a lot of senior people in public markets. I was the junior person. I was a portfolio manager at that time. And then I was going through and we had to put the minutes together and it was like, Mr. And then all the way down, it was just me as the only female in that. And that was my first moment that I realized that, oh, wow, in there. Um, and the firm has actually come a long way now, right? Like if I think about today at the leadership meeting, at our leadership, we are, I think, 45% women. In my risk department, we're up there. The senior professionals have come in like at 30, 35. So, and the reason why we do it, and this is something that I am an absolutely strong believer in, is we believe in the diversity of thought,
Mhm.
right? And what I mean by that is, um, as a firm, when we think about making investments, we make global investments. We make it across all asset classes, and you listed a bunch of them in my intro. Um, and we reflected across various different time horizons. Sometimes we make investments for less than a year, or sometimes it's 10 years. So we believe in diversity in terms of just the amount where we want to be making our investments in. And then you try to sit it out. The other side is, but if you don't believe in the diversity of thought that comes in terms of the people making those decisions,
Mhm.
how do you do that, right? And so diversity of thought is something that is really important to us. And it goes just beyond gender, right? Like it comes across all aspects of how you think. And so that's something that the CPPIB has been great at, right? Is something we believe in. We have that as part of our investment process in terms of how we make our decisions. So we've come a long way in terms of where we've started. And to me, that is the power of the firm, right? Like, and the leadership is believes in this.
Mhm. That's amazing. Preeti, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And for our last question, I think now would be a great time to share for any young women or students who are drawn to complex problem solving but may not immediately see themselves in finance. What would you want them to understand about this field?
I will say it is one of the most fascinating fields that I think, again, I'm not being biased. I've done quite a few different things.
Mhm.
I will say the one thing that really stands out for me, right, is if you have a passion for learning, right, if you're intellectually curious, this is the best place that you can think of because I had told myself that when I joined back in '08 as an analyst, that the day I stopped learning, not the week, not the month,
Mhm.
the day I stopped learning, I think it's time for me to move on. And that I'm still here. So I'm still learning. I still have that intellectual curiosity. The markets always give you new information. The people that you work with give you new information. The access that we have to some of the greatest minds across the globe. It's just a very, very fascinating field to be in. I would say the other thing that I would encourage people to think through is try to think about something that where you have a purpose because there are going to be good days, there are going to be bad days. That's the reality of the world we live in. It happens in personal, it happens in professional. You need to think about a purpose that anchors you, right? And if you find that, you find that you care about what you do, right? We spend so much of our time here at work and in this field, no matter which field you take, I'm not, this is like free advice, but try to find a purpose because purpose means that you're going to care about what you do.
Mhm.
And then the last thing I would probably say in there is it's a marathon, right? It's not a sprint.
Mhm.
I have seen a lot of people come to me and they were like, Preeti, I want to be an analyst for 1 year. I want to be an associate for 2 years. I want to be a PM there. And they come up with this wonderful career plan that is like perfect. But life doesn't happen. And so very much try to think about this is you've got a long career ahead of you. And try to think about it very much as a marathon, not a sprint, because I find that, you know, I just wish I hadn't put so much pressure on myself when I was younger.
Mhm.
And I think the society puts a lot of pressure on us. Meeting expectations puts a lot of pressure on us. And I just think, you just got to do it and enjoy the journey, right? It's not, don't focus so much on the destination. Enjoy the journey. I wish I had known that when I was younger.
That's amazing advice. Well, Preeti, thank you so much for joining us today. Your insights and generosity and sharing your journey really mean a lot, and I know our listeners will take so much away from this conversation. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Berlin. It was great talking to you. Best wishes.